Welcome, weary football pilgrims, to Lowerleagues. Tonight, our wandering star, our comet that briefly crashed to Earth, is none other than George Best, the original football rock star. The man who could bend time and space with a football at his feet, leaving defenders tied in knots like a forgotten shoelace. A genius so prodigious he could walk past opponents as if they were merely scenery, then score a goal that defied all known physics, probably while winking at the crowd. Yet this very same untouchable George Best, after gracing the grand stage of Old Trafford, after captivating a world of millions with his silky skills and even silkier sideburns, astonishingly, unbelievably, landed at Dunstable Town. Yes, Dunstable. Not Barcelona, not Real Madrid, not even, dare I say it, a fleeting cameo for Harrods, XI. No, Dunstable. A sleepy corner of Bedfordshire, a world away from the dazzling lights of European nights. It was a transfer that made less sense than a goalkeeper wearing a fascinator to the FA Cup final, and yet it happened. So get into your favoured sleep position or find your most comfortable armchair, ideally one that reclines like a perfectly weighted pass. Dim the lights until the room is as murky as a winter evening in the second division. Perhaps pour yourself a cup of herbal tea, or, if you're feeling particularly in character for our subject, maybe a generous measure of something a little stronger. Although perhaps best save the stronger stuff for when you're not trying to fall asleep. Tonight, we follow a wild ride through the glittering heights of superstardom and the surprisingly charming lows of a life lived at full throttle. Then unexpectedly idling like a broken-down sports car in a car park, George Best, a beautiful, complicated, utterly bewildering man whose life was a series of brilliant goals and spectacular own goals, often in the same half. We'll journey back to the cobbled streets of Belfast, where a skinny kid with a ball and a mind sharper than any defender first started to dance. We'll relive the meteoric rise, the European Cup glory, and the sheer, intoxicating celebrity that saw him dubbed the Fifth Beatle. Then we'll navigate the increasingly choppy waters of his private life, the famous missing in action moments, and the booze, birds, and fast cars mantra that became a tragic soundtrack to his decline. And finally, we'll arrive at that dusty, unassuming pitch in Dunstable, a moment of pure, unadulterated lower league magic, before following his unpredictable odyssey through various clubs and continents, a testament to his enduring allure and his restless spirit. Let the commentary in your head fade to a gentle hum like a forgotten match of the day highlight reel looping in the background. Let your imagination lace up its boots, because this isn't just the story of a footballer. It's the tale of a man who played the game as if the ball owed him a favor, a man whose genius could never quite be separated from the chaos it came wrapped in. The kind of genius that refused to follow the rules, not out of malice, but simply because it never occurred to him that rules applied. You see, George Best was never just a player. He was a punctuation mark in football history, an exclamation point, if you like. Bold, brash, impossible to ignore, but also at times a question mark, as in, why did he disappear before the cup final? Or why is he playing for Stockport County on a Tuesday night? Or most famously, where did it all go wrong? A question so frequently asked that even Best, in a moment of wry clarity, once replied, where did it all go right? And therein lies the beauty of this tale. Because George Best never quite made sense. Not in the way we expect heroes to. He was unpredictable. Like a backheel in his own half, he was brilliant like a chip from the halfway line. He was flawed, fragile, luminous, and human all at once. And somewhere tucked between the headlines and the hangovers, the boutiques and the missed buses, the Ballon d'Or and the bar tabs, there's a truth worth listening to, a quiet truth about love, loss, talent, and the game that forgives even as it forgets. This isn't just a recount of statistics or a dry historical account. This is a journey into the heart of a phenomenon, a man who burned brighter than any star, but whose flame was often fanned by the very winds that threatened to extinguish it. We'll explore the paradox of talent and temperament, the allure of fame and the isolation it brings, and the enduring romance of a player who defied all logic, both on and off the pitch. Prepare to be amused, perhaps a little saddened, and ultimately, profoundly mesmerized by the story of George Best, the genius who took a detour through the pub league. We begin, as all good stories should, at the very beginning. A beginning that felt anything but slow unless you were the defender he'd just left on the turf. So settle in. Let's begin. George Best was born in Belfast in 1946, not in some grand, sprawling mansion, but on the Creagog estate. Picture it. Rows of terraced houses, neat little gardens, a maze of back alleys and cobbled streets, a place where the air carried the scent of coal smoke in winter, and the sound of children's laughter punctuated by the thump of a football was constant. Tough crowd, tough winters, tougher football. This was a city steeped in its own rich history, its own unique pulse, and a deep, often understated love for the game. Boys grew up dreaming of pulling on the green jersey of Northern Ireland or making their mark in the Irish League. But George dreamed further. He was a skinny, quiet boy, not particularly imposing. He certainly didn't look like the future European Footballer of the Year, but George had two things going for him. Two gifts that set him apart from every other scruffy boy on the Craigor Green, the local playing fields where he spent every waking hour. First, he had a ball, a worn leather sphere perhaps, or even a bundle of rags tied together, but more importantly, he had a brain that saw passes, that predicted movements, that understood angles before they even existed in the physical realm. He saw the game on a different plane, a kaleidoscopic vision of possibilities where others saw only obstacles. We linger here for a while. Imagine Belfast in the late 1950s. The soft glow of lamplight reflecting off wet slate roofs after an evening shower. The distant clang of shipyards and the relentless, almost obsessive dedication of young boys to the game. They'd play until their fingers were numb and their faces were streaked with mud, their makeshift goal posts marked by discarded jumpers or too conveniently placed bins. George was one of them. Yet he wasn't. While other boys kicked, George danced. Where they stumbled, he glided. He moved differently, saw differently. He'd nutmeg his own shadow, turn defenders into dizzy spectators, and score goals that felt like magic tricks. And speaking of magic, even his school teachers noticed. There's a wonderful story from his primary school days. Young George, apparently, wasn't much for academics, preferring the geometry of the football pitch to the geometry of the classroom. But he was good at sums when they involved a ball. One time his teacher, exasperated by his constant doodling of football pitches in his exercise book, asked him, "George, what do you want to be when you grow up?" Without missing a beat, George reportedly replied, "A footballer, ma'am." The teacher, probably envisioning a future in some local Sunday league, then sternly advised him, Well, you'll need to learn to use your head, George, not just your feet. Oh, the irony. If only she knew how he'd use his head for dazzling headers, for outthinking opponents, and occasionally for avoiding lessons altogether. His local club, Glentoran, famously rejected him for being too small and light. A decision, one might argue, that ranks among the most comically misjudged in football history, right up there with the internet is a passing fad, or we really don't need more than 3 television channels. They looked at his slight frame and missed the galaxy of talent contained within a proper lower leagues moment, wouldn't you say? Someone else's loss, indeed. Then at the tender age of 15, a man named Bob Bishop, a Manchester United scout, travelled to Belfast. Bishop was a legend in his own right, a quiet, unassuming man with an uncanny eye for talent. He'd seen countless young players, but something about this slight boy from Kriegov was different. He saw the flashes of genius, the audacious skill, the innate understanding of the game. Bishop watched him play for a youth side and knew, with a certainty that must have shaken him, that he was witnessing something extraordinary. He returned to Manchester and sent the most prophetic and perhaps understated telegram in football history to Matt Busby, Manchester United's legendary manager. "I think I found you, the genius." Now here's where the humour truly shines. Matt Busby, a man not easily swayed by hyperbole, received this telegram. He then, in a stroke of genius all his own, reportedly wired back to Bishop, "Are you sure you found a genius or just a talented boy?" Bishop, a man of few words but profound conviction, simply replied, "Matt, I'm telling you, this boy picks the ball up, twists it, turns it, nutmegs players, and then sticks it in the net. He's got everything." And that apparently was enough for Busby. The idea that even a scout as shrewd as Bishop had to convince the legendary Busby that a genius was truly a genius adds a lovely, understated comedic layer. It wasn't just a boy. It was a phenomenon so extraordinary it took a second telegram to confirm its existence. A genius, not a good player, not a promising prospect. A genius. Imagine Busby, a man who had built a football dynasty from the ashes of tragedy, reading those words, perhaps with a slight raise of an eyebrow before deciding to take a chance. They were right. The world would soon discover just how right they were. But even geniuses, as we shall see, sometimes take detours. Sometimes the path to glory is not a straight line, but a winding, unpredictable road with a few, shall we say, unexpected turnoffs. A road that, on occasion, leads directly to a muddy pitch in Dunstable. The golden years. George Best debuted for Manchester United at the tender age of 17. It was September 14, 1963. A crisp Saturday afternoon against West Bromwich Albion at the hallowed Old Trafford. He emerged from the tunnel, a fresh-faced teenager with the undeniable looks of a choir boy, yet he possessed the unmistakable swagger of a young Frank Sinatra, about to own the stage. For the grizzled veterans of English football accustomed to hard tackles, mud-splashed pitches, and no-nonsense wingers, this slight figure must have been a startling sight. He was something entirely new, something effortlessly elegant. He took the field, reportedly gave West Brom's experienced fullback, Graham Williams, an absolute roasting. A polite way of saying he turned the poor man's legs into spaghetti. And just for good measure, showcasing the sheer audacity that would define him, he even nutmegged him an audacious, almost disrespectful move for a debutante. It was a silent yet powerful declaration: "I'm here and I play by my own rules." He didn't score that day, but the crowd in a collective murmur sensed something extraordinarily special had arrived. A whisper started circulating around the terraces, a collective gasp of, "Did you see that kid?" His ascent was nothing short of meteoric from a promising debutante. He rocketed to superstardom with breathtaking speed. It wasn't just his skill, it was the way he carried himself, the sheer charisma that emanated from him. By the age of 22, just 5 years later, he had ascended to the very top, crowned European Footballer of the Year, the most prestigious individual award in the game. He wasn't simply playing football, he was performing. He was art in motion, a ballet dancer in muddy boots, a magician with a ball. He could glide past defenders like they weren't even there, probably because they had been hypnotized by his famous sideburns, which seemed to grow in glamour as quickly as his reputation. Or perhaps the sheer audacity of his feints, that subtle shift of weight that sent opponents careening helplessly in the wrong direction. He had an almost uncanny ability to change direction at full speed, leaving defenders grasping at thin air, sometimes even falling over their own feet in sheer bewilderment. There's a classic line often attributed to opponents after playing against him. "I knew where he was going, but I couldn't stop him." Imagine the sheer, teeth-grinding frustration of trying to contain George Best. This period was the absolute peak of his footballing prowess. He possessed an almost impenetrable balance, a low center of gravity that allowed him to twist and turn in impossibly tight spaces. He was genuinely two-footed, able to dribble, pass, and shoot with equal devastating effect from either side. His vision was panoramic, seeing passes that others simply couldn't conceive if he didn't just run with the ball. He caressed it, controlled it as if it were an extension of his own body. He was poetry in motion, and Old Trafford became his personal theatre. He was football's first true superstar, transcending the sport itself and becoming a bona fide pop culture icon. The press, captivated by his long hair, dashing looks, and rebellious charm, dubbed him the Fifth Beatle. It wasn't just a nickname, it was a phenomenon. He was a fashion icon whose every move was scrutinized, every goal celebrated with fervent intensity, every escapade whispered about with a mixture of awe and gentle disapproval. He endorsed products from sausages to suits, graced magazine covers, opened boutiques, namely Bestie's Boutique in Manchester, and even had his own pop songs. But we'll kindly spare you those particular musical adventures. He lived a life that seemed plucked straight from a Hollywood script, a dazzling contrast to the gritty post-war austerity that still clung to much of Britain. He arrived at training in his sleek E-Type Jaguar, wore clothes that would make modern fashionistas blush with envy, and simply existed in a different stratosphere to his contemporaries. He didn't just play for United. He was United in a way no player before him had ever been, a walking, dribbling, goal-scoring advertisement for charisma and raw, untamed talent. Let's linger on some of his truly iconic performances, moments etched into the very fabric of Manchester United history. The 1966 European Cup quarter-final against Benfica, played on their own turf. The Estadio de Luz United were massive underdogs travelling to Lisbon to face a team that had reached 4 of the previous 5 European Cup finals. The Portuguese press had, predictably, written them off entirely. Then George walked out. He didn't just play, he put on a clinic. He scored 2 goals in a stunning 5-1 away victory, a performance so dazzling, so utterly dominant, that it earned him the moniker El Beatle from the awestruck Portuguese press. One of his goals involved him receiving the ball, chipping it over the onrushing goalkeeper,
then heading it into an empty net, an audacious, almost cheeky display of arrogance and skill that only a genius could pull off. It was a moment that sent shockwaves across Europe, announcing George Best as a truly global force. Matt Busby, watching from the sidelines, must have known then, truly known what he had on his hands. And then there was the summit, the very pinnacle of his footballing career, the 1968 European Cup final against that same Benfica side, played at Wembley. This was more than just a football match. It was destiny. It was 10 years after the Munich air disaster, that horrific tragedy that had decimated Busby's beloved babes. A decade of relentless rebuilding, fueled by the haunting memory of the fallen. A sacred mission for the club to return to glory. The tension was palpable, thick enough to cut with a butter knife. The game was locked at 1-1 at full time, heading into extra time. The nerves were frayed, the legs were tired. The hope of a nation hung precariously in the humid London air.
Just 2 minutes into the extra period, a long goal kick from Alex Stepney, United's goalkeeper, was flicked on by the energetic Brian Kidd. The ball bounced, almost playfully, and Best was there. It was as if the universe had conspired to put him in that exact spot at that precise moment. He shaped to go right, feinted left, the most subtle of body movements, and it was enough. He rounded the onrushing Benfica goalkeeper, Jose Henrique, with a move so deceptive it felt like a sleight of hand. A conjurer's trick. Henrique was left sprawling, a mere accessory to the unfolding masterpiece. The net was open. He calmly slotted the ball in, a bobbling, almost casual finish that belied the monumental stakes. It was a goal born of instinct, supreme confidence, and a quiet moment of calm amidst the chaos. United never looked back, scoring 2 more through Kidd and the legendary Bobby Charlton to win 4-1. That goal, that moment, secured United's first ever European Cup, fulfilling Matt Busby's lifelong dream and cementing George Best's place as a footballing immortal. The Beatles had Liverpool, football had George. Best formed one of the most famous attacking trio in English football history alongside Sir Bobby Charlton and Dennis Law, the Holy Trinity. Charlton, the elder statesman, all power and precision. Law, the fierce, predatory goalscorer, and Best, the flamboyant, unpredictable artist. They complemented each other perfectly, an unstoppable force that brought joy to millions. They weren't just teammates. They were legends woven together, each amplifying the other's brilliance. Old Trafford became a fortress of attacking football, and every match was an event. Another indelible image from these golden years was his famous goal against Tottenham Hotspur in 1967. He received the ball deep in his own half, embarking on a dazzling solo run, leaving a trail of bamboozled Spurs defenders in his wake. He dribbled past one, then another, turning them inside out before slotting the ball calmly past the goalkeeper. It was a goal that encapsulated his individual brilliance, his unparalleled dribbling ability, and his seemingly effortless grace. He played with a freedom, a joy, and an almost mischievous smile that made everyone fall in love with him. He wasn't just winning games. He was winning hearts. He was the most exciting thing in British football, perhaps in British celebrity, and the world was utterly captivated. But even at the very pinnacle of his achievements, whispers began to circulate. And it was during these golden years,
amidst the dazzling goals and the deafening cheers that the first hints of the other, George Best began to emerge.
The George who lived life to a rhythm entirely his own. While his teammates might have been tucked away in the team hotel the night before a big game, adhering to strict curfews, George often preferred his own company, or more accurately, the company of Manchester's vibrant nightlife. There are countless tales of him being out until the small hours, only to turn up for the match the next day, seemingly unfazed, and deliver another mesmerizing performance. It was infuriating for managers, baffling for opponents, and utterly captivating for everyone else. He seemed to defy the very laws of athletic preparation. As one baffled teammate reportedly quipped, he could be out all night, turn up hungover, and still be the best player on the pitch. It was a level of natural talent that made conventional discipline seem almost irrelevant, a dangerous precedent for a young man with such immense charisma. Then there was the growing scale of his personal life, matching the grandeur of his football. He bought a magnificent new mansion, complete with a swimming pool and a vast garden. And what does one do with a magnificent new mansion? Naturally, one throws a party, a very large party. So large, in fact, that the tale goes he had to instruct his gardener to leave the sprinklers running on the lawn for several days afterwards, to wash away the sheer volume of champagne corks and discarded party favors left behind by a seemingly endless stream of celebrity guests. It was a joke among the players. George's garden needed more than just a trim after his weekend. This wasn't just a footballer living well. This was a superstar embracing a lifestyle of pure, unadulterated excess. He didn't just earn money. He spent it with a joyous, almost reckless abandon, a living embodiment of the newfound liberation of the swinging 60s. These were the subtle cracks, the charming eccentricities that at the time seemed just part of the George Best phenomenon fun. Amusing anecdotes that made him even more of a legend, but even at the very pinnacle of his achievements, whispers began to circulate. Barely noticeable at first, like a faint crack in a perfectly crafted vase. The demands of fame, the constant scrutiny, the endless temptations of a life lived in the fast lane began to take their toll. The quiet boy from Belfast was now a global phenomenon, and the world was watching with a mixture of adoration and increasingly a hint of concern. The sheer magnitude of his celebrity was unprecedented for a footballer, and there was no manual, no guide for navigating such a dazzling yet dangerous landscape. The stage was set for a descent, a detour from the path of eternal glory. By the early 1970s, the wobbles had become more frequent, more pronounced, evolving from mischievous quirks into genuine problems. The subtle cracks observed during his golden years had fractured, revealing a growing chasm between the undisputed genius on the pitch and the increasingly erratic figure off it. George was missing matches, missing flights, missing, well, everything that constituted the mundane, rigorous routine of a professional footballer. His commitment to Manchester United, once seemingly absolute, forged in the fires of European glory, now seemed to be measured in fleeting moments of brilliance rather than consisting presence. It was a cruel irony. His talent was undiminished, perhaps even more breathtaking in its sporadic appearances. but his reliability was dwindling faster than attendance at a pre-season friendly in the pouring rain. The club, under the unenviable stewardship of manager Frank O'Farrell, found himself grappling with the ever more perplexing enigma of George Best. How do you discipline a genius who, even when clearly half-committed, can still turn a game on its head with a single audacious flick of his boot? O'Farrell tried everything. The fines were endless, the warnings stern, the pleas heartfelt, the ultimatums delivered, but they seemed to bounce off George like a missed tackle off a brick wall. He was a force of nature, a hurricane of talent and defiance, and you simply couldn't put a leash on him, no matter how many times he blew the roof off the training ground. O'Farrell's frustration was palpable. He famously lamented, "I think George has decided he wants to live his life, not play football." This was a manager driven to despair, trying to manage a star who operated by a different set of rules that seemed to exist only in George's own head. Players, accustomed to the rigid hierarchies and collective discipline of professional football, looked on in a mixture of awe, frustration, and perhaps a touch of bewildered envy. They saw the fines pile up, the public admonishments, and yet, there he was, often still the best player on the field when he did decide to show up. It created an impossible situation for any manager, a constant tightrope walk between nurturing a unique talent and maintaining team discipline. How do you tell the rest of the squad to follow the rules when the star player so brazenly ignored them? The dressing room atmosphere, once a tight-knit unit, began to fray under the strain of Best's unpredictable genius. Then came the legendary incidents. There was the infamous occasion in December 1971, when he turned up for a game against Chelsea in a tuxedo. Not just any game, but a crucial First Division fixture. A true rock star entrance, perhaps, designed for a paparazzi flashbulb moment, but hardly the attire of a professional footballer about to face a grueling 90 minutes of mud, tackles, and freezing temperatures. He'd been out socializing, missed the team bus, and arrived just in time for kickoff. It was a bizarre, almost defiant gesture, a public display of his growing disdain for the formalities and expected conduct of the game. He simply didn't care for the conventions, the rules that applied to mere mortals. And then, just over a year later, came the note, scrawled on his locker. A succinct, almost poetic declaration of independence that became a microcosm of his chaotic life. Gone to get milk. The punchline, of course, being that he didn't come back for 3 weeks. He had flown to Marbella on a whim, leaving United in the lurch, plunging the club into crisis. Imagine the bewilderment, the exasperation, the sheer Georgeness of it all. He wasn't just being rebellious. He was seemingly operating on a different temporal plane, a universe where the mundane requirements of a football club, like, say, showing up for training or communicating his whereabouts, simply didn't register. His world was one of impulse, desire, and immediate gratification, a direct collision with the structured demands of top-level sport. This wasn't just a missed training session. It was an act of profound self-sabotage, a clear sign that the pressure, the fame, and his burgeoning personal struggles were taking a heavy toll. He'd disappear on impromptu trips to Marbella, a sun-drenched haven that became synonymous with his escapism, often without warning, leaving club officials tearing their hair out and the media in a frenzy. The headlines became a constant companion, detailing his latest escapade rather than his latest goal. Stories of lavish parties, expensive cars crashing. He reportedly went through countless luxury cars, and ever-present beautiful women became as commonplace as match reports. The phrase booze, birds, and fast cars was quickly becoming his infamous mantra. Not just a lifestyle choice, but almost a personal brand, a public declaration of his hedonistic pursuits. One particular incident involved him being found asleep in the street outside a club, having supposedly tried to drive his sports car home. Without the keys, having misplaced them in a haze of revelry, it was these increasingly public spectacles that began to overshadow his on-field brilliance, pulling him further into a vortex of self-destruction. The beautiful game, which had once been his sanctuary and his stage, was becoming a backdrop to a very public struggle. The sheer pressure, the weight of being George Best, seemed to be crushing him. He was the most famous footballer on the planet, a celebrity beyond compare, yet he seemed unable to cope with the scrutiny, the loneliness that fame paradoxically often brings. There were several retirements during this period, each one a dramatic, short-lived declaration that he was walking away from the game, only to return drawn back by the allure of the pitch, or perhaps the sheer lack of anything else to fill the void. These were desperate cries for attention, or perhaps desperate attempts to regain control of a life that felt utterly out of control. Finally, in 1974, after a series of tumultuous events, missed trainings and public clashes, the inevitable happened. George Best, the dazzling genius, the fifth Beatle, made his definitive break from Manchester United, the theatre of Old Trafford, the roaring crowds, the red shirt. It was all behind him. The golden years were over. What followed was a bewildering, unpredictable, and often poignant odyssey through the lower leagues and across continents, a journey we'll explore next as we chart the remarkable, and at times ridiculous, life after the theatre of dreams. How did we get here? George's post-United adventures began with a rather surprising detour to South Africa in May 1974, with his Manchester United career in turmoil and a final departure looking inevitable. Best was tempted to the high veld by Jewish Guild West Rand, a Johannesburg club that had recently been promoted to the top division of the South African National Football League. This move came during the height of the apartheid era, a period when the South African National Football League was a segregated one, forcing black teams to play in separate leagues. Despite these inherent moral issues, South African clubs managed to attract British players to play for a few games to boost attendances and raise the standard of football. Dozens of high-profile players were lured by the financial rewards, including Best's former teammate Bobby Charlton and his brother Jack. Best, at just 27, should have been at his peak, but his maverick talents and global star appeal were still undeniable. His arrival in Johannesburg was met with immense excitement. The club even rented the much larger Rand Stadium for his debut against Hellenic, fearing their home ground wouldn't accommodate the crowds. Sure enough, an impressive crowd of 30,000 turned up, adding to the surreal nature of the occasion. Both World Cup winning captain Bobby Moore and England international Jeff Assel were playing for the opposition. However, Best's first game was an uneventful 1-1 draw where he failed to stand out. It seemed the investment might not pay off. Jewish Guild officials were reportedly already worried they'd taken on too much baggage, especially after Best, suffering a severe case of sunstroke from overindulging in the wicked Highveld sun, missed his first training session. But then, as always with Best, there were flashes. In his second game against Durban City, he showed glimpses of his old genius in the driving rain.
laying on a second goal in a 2-0 victory. This performance was enough to earn him a 2-game extension to his deal. Despite Best's intermittent brilliance, his stay was brief, yielding just 1 goal from 5 league appearances. Interest in his appearances waned rapidly, and a few games later, Best played his last match for Jewish Guild in front of less than 10,000 spectators. His time in South Africa was perhaps more notable for the sunstroke and a bizarre incident involving a notorious local stripper attending his first full training session. Best soon returned home, his short sojourn having set the tone for the rest of his peripatetic career. If playing in South Africa was an odd choice, his next port of call bordered on the surreal indeed. The journey from Johannesburg to Dunstable was perhaps the first true indicator of the wildly unpredictable path his career would take. So after the dazzling heights of Wembley, the tumultuous nights in Manchester, and the increasingly public wobbles of a superstar, how on earth did we arrive at Dunstable? From the pinnacle of European football, the bright lights of the European Cup, to a dusty, struggling club scraping by in the Southern League. It feels like the punchline to a particularly improbable joke, doesn't it? Yet this is precisely where our meandering narrative takes us, into the wonderfully absurd heart of lower league football.
The answer, incredibly, impossibly, lies with a man named Barry Fry. Now Barry Fry. Where do we even begin? Ex-player, manager of countless clubs across the lower echelons of English football. And as you correctly noted, a walking, talking quote machine, a true character with an infectious, almost deranged optimism. Fry was at this point in 1974, managing Dunstable Town. He was a man who understood that in non-league football you had to be more than just a manager. You had to be a showman, a fundraiser, a charmer, and occasionally a miracle worker. And his Dunstable Town was certainly in need of a miracle. Picture a stadium that was barely more than a pitch with a couple of rudimentary, rickety stands, perhaps a leaky corrugated iron roof over the main section if they were lucky. No floodlights, save for perhaps the glow of the chippy van parked nearby. No cash, the club coffers likely as empty as a politician's promises, and certainly no fans, unless you counted someone's nan, 3 men and a dog named Sparky, all bundled up against the chill, nursing lukewarm Bovril. The average attendance was, to put it mildly, modest. Some reports suggest as low as 34 people, most of whom were probably Fry's relatives, conscripted for moral support, or perhaps local farmers who'd wandered in looking for a lost sheep. The grass, one imagines, might have been a tad on the long side, perhaps a few rogue dandelions providing an unexpected splash of colour. This was the raw, unglamorous, utterly charming reality of English non-league football. Fry, a man known for his flamboyant schemes, his boundless optimism, and his uncanny ability to talk anyone into anything, had an idea. A ludicrous, brilliant, absolutely bonkers idea. He was desperate to get the club noticed, to put Dunstable on the map, even if that map was currently only visible under a microscope. He needed a splash, a headline, something to bring in a crowd, even a curious one. He needed a hook, a big one. And where do you find a big hook when you're managing a financially struggling Southern League club? You go to Manchester, of course, specifically one Sunday night while visiting one of his old haunts, a nightclub called Slack Hellis, which in a delightful twist of fate, George Best himself actually owned. Fry,
Ever the opportunist saw his chance, he cornered the legend amidst the pulsating music and the clinking glasses. "George," he said, perhaps shouting over the din, "I need a favor. I want you to play in 2 pre-season friendlies for Dunstable Town." You can almost hear the record scratch in the background of that nightclub, the audacity, the sheer, unadulterated gall. People, when they eventually heard, laughed the entire footballing world, if they even heard about it, over the roar of the top flight. Probably chuckled into their pints, dismissing it as another Fryism, a harmless flight of fancy from a man famous for them. Even Manchester United manager Tommy Doherty, a quick-witted character himself, reportedly quipped when Fry audaciously asked for permission to play best Dunstable. "What makes you think Bisty will play for Dunstable when I can't get him to play here at Old Trafford?" It was the perfect sardonic summation of George's increasingly complicated relationship with his employers, and indeed, with the very concept of professional obligation.
But Best, astonishingly, miraculously, said yes, he agreed. He, George Best, European Footballer of the Year, the man who had tormented the world's best defenders, the international playboy, was going to pull on the humble blue shirt of Dunstable Town. The agreement was apparently simple. A handshake, a promise, and a princely sum, reportedly around 1,000 per game. A fortune for an unleagued club, a gamble on Fry's part, but a mere pittance for Best's previous earnings, barely enough to cover a decent night out in London, let alone a few weeks of his customary lifestyle. But why? Why did he say yes? This is the million-dollar question, the one that truly encapsulates the mystique of George Best. Was it purely the money, small as it was to him, but perhaps a convenient immediate cash injection for someone whose extravagant life meant he was never truly flush? Was it the mischief, the sheer audacity of the idea, a desire to thumb his nose at the establishment, to prove he could still play anywhere on any pitch, and still draw a crowd bigger than most second-division clubs? A playful act of defiance against the very system that now seemed to frustrate him? Or perhaps, was it something deeper? The memory of a simpler game, a yearning for the pure, unadulterated joy of kicking a ball without the crushing weight of expectation, the relentless glare of paparazzi, and the endless demands of top-flight football. A chance to reconnect with the innocent roots of his love for football, far from the suffocating glare of the First Division, in a place where the biggest pressure was whether the pie and mash would run out at half-time. We may never truly know his precise motivation. George Best was a man of contradictions, his decisions often driven by impulses that defied conventional logic. He was a creature of instinct, of whim, and sometimes, perhaps, of nostalgia. But one thing is certain. It happened. The handshake was firm. The deal was struck. The greatest player of his generation, a man still in his 20s, was coming to Dunstable, and the town, quite literally, went wild. The sleepy corner of Bedfordshire, usually only making headlines for its annual fete, was about to become the unlikely epicenter of the footballing universe, if only for an afternoon. The whispers turned into shouts. The local papers ran banner headlines. And suddenly, everyone in Dunstable knew someone who knew someone who had a ticket, or knew someone who knew someone who knew George Best. The stage was set for an event that would be talked about for decades. August 5th, 1974. The day that Dunstable Town, a humble non-league club, briefly became the most famous football club in England. The sun, if memory serves, might have even been shining. The match, Dunstable Town versus Manchester United reserve. Best, the prodigal son, wearing the unfamiliar blue of Dunstable. The crowd. The crowd. Nobody really counted accurately. They were too busy blinking in disbelief. Estimates range wildly from a conservative 500 to a mythical 10,000. Some reports claim another 5,000 people were locked out, spilling into the high street, desperate for a glimpse of the legend. It was a crowd unlike anything Dunstable had ever seen or would ever see again. A mixture of genuine Dunstable supporters, curious locals who wouldn't normally touch a football match with a 10-foot pole and hardened. Manchester United fans who'd travelled hours just to see their former idol, even in this improbable setting. They came with pint glasses in hand, with families, with dogs, with a collective sense of, I can't believe this is happening. Let's play the match, minute by minute. Imagine the pitch at Creasy Park, uneven, a bit too long in places, perhaps a little bobbly. The scent of freshly cut grass mixed with the anticipation of something truly extraordinary. The boots not quite laced with the precision of a top-flight game. And then there he was, George Best, stepping onto the field. The roar that went up was not for a goal, but simply for his presence. A collective gasp of he's really here. He played like it was Wembley. Forget the non-league setting. Forget the mismatched opposition. Best for 90 glorious minutes was Best. He was all jinking runs, impossible turns, audacious nutmegs, and back heels that seemed to defy the laws of geometry. He received the ball and time seemed to slow. He'd glide past 2, 3. Sometimes 4 defenders, leaving them flailing in his wake, looking utterly bewildered. The crowd was mesmerized. Every touch, every dribble, every flick of his boot drew gasps, murmurs, and then erupting cheers. Some say he signed a shirt with a pint of Guinness. An apocryphal tale perhaps, but one that perfectly captures the surreal, spontaneous spirit of the day. Dunstable won 3-2. A victory that in any other context would have been quickly forgotten. But on that day it was a triumph that felt like winning the FA Cup. The final whistle blew and the crowd erupted, not just for the win, but for the experience. Best waved, a small, almost shy gesture, perhaps a flick of the archway. There was the occasion when he showed up late traffic, apparently. Got out of his car, scored a goal, then simply got back in the car and left a perfectly George Best moment, encapsulating his nonchalant genius and his capricious approach to professional football. A fleeting glimpse of brilliance, then gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of disbelief and wonder.
He didn't just grace the pitch, he also made a tangible contribution. He donated money to buy new nets for the club, a small gesture that meant the world to a struggling non-league side. He hugged kids who swarmed him for autographs, his famous smile radiating genuine warmth. He never trained, of course. That would have been entirely out of character, but his presence alone was training enough for the opposition, a master class in how to be consistently inconsistent, yet still utterly captivating. In this part of the story, let's pause often picture the wide-eyed kids, some of whom wouldn't have been old enough to remember his Manchester United heyday, getting his autograph, scrawled quickly on programs, scraps of paper, or even their own forearms. Imagine the old men in the stands, some of whom might have seen him at Old Trafford, wiping their eyes, unable to believe what they were witnessing. And think of the thousands of Sunday league players, the pub team legends, the weekend warriors who could forever say, with a glint in their eye, "I once saw George Best play on a pitch with puddles." That's what made it magic. George Best didn't have to play for Dunstable Town. He could have chosen a multitude of other, more glamorous, less muddy options across the globe. But he did. And it mattered. It mattered to Barry Fry, who saw his gimmick propel his club into national headlines. It mattered to the people of Dunstable, who got to witness a living legend up close, stripped of the glamour but not of the genius. And perhaps it even mattered to George, a brief, uncomplicated return to the pure joy of the game, away from the expectations and the pressures that had begun to weigh him down at the very top. It was a fleeting, beautiful absurdity, a reminder that even the greatest stars sometimes shine brightest in the most unexpected places. The Dunstable detour, for all its charming absurdity, was just one small, quirky chapter in George Best's meandering post-Manchester United career. After his tumultuous, final departure from Old Trafford in 1974, the genius who had once anchored a dynasty became a footballing nomad. The years rolled on, and George kept playing, sort of, for a dizzying, sometimes bewildering array of clubs across continents, each one a testament to his enduring allure, his financial needs, and his restless spirit. From the dizzying heights of the First Division, his journey took him through the lower echelons of English football, to the fledgling leagues of America, to the often overlooked corners of Ireland and Scotland. He was like a dazzling, slightly frayed circus act, popping up in unexpected towns, always promising a flash of magic, even if it was just for one night. He graced the pitches of Stockport County for a brief spell in 1975, a club then languishing in the 4th Division, a world away from the grandeur of United. His first appearance for the Hatters was a friendly against 1st Division side Stoke City on November 10. 1975, attracting a huge crowd of 8,000 to Edgeley Park. Best, admitting he was a long way off fitness, still managed to excite the fans by scoring a magnificent 25-yard free kick in the 1-1 draw. It was a tantalizing glimpse of the old magic, enough to make you believe. He would go on to play just 3 league games for Stockport, scoring twice. His goals came against Swansea City in his first professional game since leaving United, and Watford, before drawing a blank in his final appearance for the club on Boxing Day. Despite the brevity of his stay, Stockport County remains part of an exclusive group of clubs to have had Best on their books.
Then a few weeks later, it was off to his homeland for a very short, curious stint with Cork Celtic in the League of Ireland. From December 1975 to January 1976, Chelsea icon Bobby Tambling, who was then manager, convinced the financially struggling. Cork bore to offer Best 1,000 per match to draw the crowds. News of one of Northern Ireland's finest sons appearing in Cork caught the public's imagination, necessitating the relocation of his debut match against Drogheda United to the much larger Flower Lodge Stadium. A fervent crowd of 12,000 paid to see him, but a clearly unfit Best couldn't inspire his new team, as Drogheda won 2-0. Best, ever the charming diplomat, commented after the match, "It's always hard playing your first match for a new club. It takes a while to get used to one another." He did, however, deliver a much improved performance in his second game for Cork Celtic, a 1-0 home victory against reigning champions Bohemians, where he was reportedly hungrier and showed real commitment to work hard. But even in that victory, the man of the match honour went to local boy Brian McSweeney, not Best his third and ultimately last. Game for Cork Celtic was an away trip to Dublin to play Shelburne. It's claimed that Best prepared for this match by charging a number of champagne bottles to the club the night before, and surprisingly, his performance was described as easy money for a player who showed he simply did not want to be involved. By a scathing Irish Times match report, which concluded, "As far as I am concerned, I never want to set eyes on him again." Best's time with Cork Celtic yielded no goals from his 3 league appearances, a truly less than glamorous footnote for a player who had once scored for fun. Perhaps most famously, he ventured across the Atlantic, embracing the sun-drenched pitches and the burgeoning celebrity culture of the North American Soccer League. The NASL, this was a league with a flair for the dramatic, signing aging but still iconic European and South American stars to boost its profile and attract crowds. Best signed for the Los Angeles Aztecs in 1976, where he quickly became an instant star. He initially struggled with fitness, a recurring theme by this point, and was even suspended for 5 games for missing training and team flights. However, by the end of his first season, he was finding his form and became the league's 4th highest scorer with 15 goals in 24 games, earning him the NASL's Player of the Year award. In Los Angeles, a city of dreams, Best celebrity fitting perfectly into the Hollywood backdrop, almost as if he'd been specifically designed for it. He became a fixture in the LA party scene, often seen rubbing shoulders with film stars and musicians. He was the ultimate showman, and the NASL's relaxed, entertainment-focused atmosphere was perhaps a much more forgiving environment for his mercurial talents and personal struggles. His on-field moments could still be breathtaking in a 1976 game against the Miami Toros. Best picked up the ball deep in his own half, dribbled past 6 defenders, and rounded the goalkeeper before slotting it into an empty net. It was a goal so spectacular it became an NASL highlight reel staple, a pure distillation of his genius. Best himself later commented on the NASL's unique challenges, wryly stating, "They didn't exactly have the best defenders in the world, but they certainly knew how to kick you."
He even returned to the Aztecs for a second stint in 1977, 1978, playing alongside other European veterans like the incomparable Johan Cruyff and the majestic Franz Beckenbauer. Imagine that lineup: Cruyff, Beckenbauer, and Best, a triumvirate of footballing royalty, even if they were now in their career's twilight. Cruyff, renowned for his own ego, was reportedly left awestruck by Best's natural talent, once remarking, "George Best was a genius, an individual, the greatest footballer ever." Beckenbauer, der Kaiser himself, supposedly said of Best, "He had everything: balance, 2 feet, speed, great body control. Fantastic. He was a complete player." The quality of the football might not always have been top-tier European, but the sheer spectacle was undeniable. Best could still produce moments of breathtaking skill, weaving past opponents who perhaps weren't quite of the same defensive caliber as his English counterparts, but who certainly paid good money to see him. However, the crazy antics continued. Best's manager at the Aztecs, Terry Fisher, once recalled finding Best in his hotel room before a game, surrounded by empty champagne bottles, and a former Miss World Fisher famously told him, "George, get up. We've got a game in 2 hours." To which Best allegedly replied, "Terry, I've got 2 hours. We can break the record." This illustrates the sheer magnetism and simultaneous self-destructive streak that defined him. After his time with the Aztecs, he moved on to the Fort Lauderdale Strikers in 1978-1979. Here, he often played barefoot in training, a testament to his innate feel for the ball and his disdain for convention. He continued to score dazzling goals and provide assists captivating the Florida crowds. But a prodigal son eventually returns, even if it's not to the grand home, after his globe-trotting adventures. George Best found himself back in England, surprisingly not gracing the hallowed turf of the First Division, but lining up for Fulham in the slightly less glamorous Second Division, from 1976 to 1977. It was a move that raised eyebrows, a superstar slumming it, or perhaps a genius seeking a less intense spotlight. But the real magic of this Fulham spell wasn't just Best's presence. It was the utterly bonkers dream team he found himself a part of. Imagine this for a pub quiz question. Name the club where George Best, Bobby Moore, and Rodney Marsh all played together. The answer, gloriously, is Fulham. Here you had a holy trinity of footballing mavericks: Bobby Moore, the unflappable, elegant defender, a World Cup winning captain whose positional sense was so sublime he barely seemed to break a sweat. Then there was Rodney Marsh, a showman in his own right, a gifted but often unpredictable forward with a penchant for the theatrical and a healthy disregard for authority. And then, of course, there was Bestie. It was a cocktail of talent, ego, and a shared love for the finer things in life that promised either spectacular success or glorious implosion. It mostly leaned towards the latter. But oh, the entertainment value was off the charts.
One particularly amusing anecdote that often surfaces from this era involves a pre-match team talk. Alex Stock, the Fulham manager, a man who'd seen it all in his long career, was trying to instill some tactical discipline. He was diagramming formations on the blackboard, meticulously explaining defensive responsibilities when Marsh, never one for tactical minutiae, reportedly piped up with a twinkle in his eye. "Boss, with the greatest respect, are we actually planning on doing any defending, or are we just going to rely on George to score more than they do?" Stock, a man known for his dry wit, apparently just sighed and rubbed his temples. Trying to impose a rigid structure on that trio was like trying to herd particularly flamboyant cats. Another tale speaks to their rather relaxed approach to training. It wasn't uncommon for one, if not all three, to arrive a touch late. Shall we say one morning, the story goes, Moore strolled into the training ground looking particularly dapper. Even for him, Stock inquired where Best and Marsh were. Moore, with a completely straight face, apparently replied, "Well, boss, we had a very important tactical meeting last night that ran a little late." The tactical meeting, it was later revealed by less discreet teammates, had involved a rather lengthy session at a West End drinking establishment. Stock, knowing full well what this meeting entailed, simply shook his head, a wry smile playing on his lips. What could you do? They were box office. Even if their timekeeping was decidedly non-league on the pitch, the magic did occasionally happen. There were glimpses of the old brilliance moments where Best would weave through defenders. Moore would execute a perfect tackle, and Marsh would produce a moment of outrageous skill. But consistency was, shall we say, a foreign concept. One week, they might look like world beaters, the next they'd be comprehensively outrun by a more youthful, if less gifted, second division side. Their matches became must-see events, not always for the quality of the football, but for the sheer unpredictability of what might happen. A moment of genius, a comical blunder, or perhaps even a minor on-field disagreement between three players who were all used to being the main man. Their season was a roller coaster of the sublime and the ridiculous. Take, for instance, the FA Cup third-round match against Hereford United in January 1977. Fulham, with Best, Moore and Marsh all on the pitch, were expected to brush aside their fourth division opponents. What transpired was a gritty, rain-soaked 1-1 draw at Edgar Street, a far cry from the dazzling football expected. The replay at Craven Cottage was equally frustrating, ending in a 2-2 draw. Fulham finally scraped through after a penalty shootout, but it was a clear indication that pure star power without the relentless grind of modern professionalism wasn't always enough against determined lower league opposition. Then there were the moments that reminded everyone why they paid their admission. A match against Leicester City saw Best roll back the years with a performance that had flashes of his Old Trafford pomp, dribbling past multiple defenders and creating chances seemingly out of thin air, or the time he reportedly scored directly from a corner kick against Brighton. A moment of audacious skill that left jaws on the floor. These were the glimpses, the tantalizing reminders of the genius that still lurked within.
However, the flip side was equally dramatic. There were games where the collective stamina seemed to visibly drain away after an hour, leaving them exposed. Matches where a sudden burst of youthful energy from the opposition would leave the veteran trio trailing in their wake, looking less like footballing gods and more like particularly well-dressed statues. Best, in particular, was known for his unpredictable appearances and disappearances within matches themselves, moments of breathtaking inactivity followed by sudden explosive brilliance. It was a beautiful, chaotic spectacle that kept everyone on the edge of their seats, even if it wasn't always leading to points on the board. The fans, though, adored them. They flocked to Craven Cottage, a ground steeped in history but perhaps not used to such a concentration of star power, just to witness these three grand masters. Even if their combined fitness levels might have raised an eyebrow or two, and their dedication to a full 90 minutes was sometimes questionable. It was a last hurrah, a nostalgic gathering of legends, a beautiful, chaotic, and ultimately fleeting moment in football history. The romance of it all often outweighed the actual results, but for those who were there, the memories of Best, Moore, and Marsh gracing the same pitch, however briefly and haphazardly, were undoubtedly worth the price of admission. Then it was off to Scotland, for a spell with Hibernian in Edinburgh from 1979 to 1980, Bestie in the Scottish top flight. What could go wrong? Or perhaps what couldn't go wrong, depending on your perspective. He continued to captivate Scottish crowds, filling stadiums and bringing a level of star power the league hadn't seen in years. The turnstiles at Easter Road, Hibs' home ground, positively spun when George was in the team. He signed a lucrative pay-as-you-play deal, reportedly earning $2,000 for every appearance. For context, at that time, top Hibs players were earning around £12,000 per week. His debut arrived on November 24, 1979, an away fixture at St Mirren's Love Street. A crowd of over 13,600 packed into the stadium, more than double what would usually be expected. Best got on the scores sheet with a late left-foot finish, but Hibs ultimately went down 2-1. After the match, St Mirren manager Jim Clooney summed up the situation with wonderfully dry Scottish wit. "I don't mind them having the star man if my boys get the points." The following week, Best's handsome wage packet proved to be a sound investment, as over 20,000 fans crammed into Easter Road for his home debut against Partick. Thistle, almost 4 times the expected attendance. Best every touch was greeted with applause, and an audacious 40-yard free kick brought out the best in Thistle keeper Allen. Rough, robbing Best of a home debut goal. There were flashes, of course, moments where the old magic flickered, a dazzling run, a precise pass that suggested the genius was still very much alive. He even scored a few memorable goals, including one against Ayr United that was a vintage Best solo effort, reminding everyone of his former glories in a home match against Rangers in December. Best put in arguably his finest performance in the green and white jersey as he led his side to a 2-1 victory during that match.
The travelling Rangers support, known for their lively banter, taunted Best by throwing cans of lager towards him as he went to take a corner kick. George, with classic nonchalance, calmly diffused a potentially ugly situation by picking up one of the cans and pretending to take a sip from it. Laughter could be heard at both ends of the stadium.
But alas, consistency, like a reliable alarm clock, was a foreign concept to George by this point. His battles off the pitch often overshadowed his performances on it. Manager Eddie Turnbull, a no-nonsense Scotsman with a reputation for strict discipline, tried to reel him in to impose some semblance of order on Best's chaotic existence. It was, as you might imagine, a fruitless endeavour. Turnbull fined him heavily for missing training, but the fine seemed to vanish into the ether, much like George himself after a night out. One widely recounted story goes that Turnbull, after Best had been missing from training for days, reportedly asked him where he'd been. George, ever the charmer, simply replied, "I was resting, boss. Getting ready for the game." Turnbull, knowing full well resting likely involved a lengthy pub session, could only shake his head in exasperation. Another infamous incident occurred in February 1980. George entered into an all-night drinking session at Edinburgh's North British Hotel, now the Balmoral, with Blondie singer Debbie Harry and the French international rugby team, who had just played at Murrayfield. French captain Jean-Pierre Rives had reportedly insisted Best join the soiree. The celebration continued until 11 a.m. on Sunday, just hours before Hibs were due to kick off against Ayr United in the Scottish Cup. Best, nursing the mother of all hangovers, was in no fit state to play. A furious club owner, Tom Hart, ordered the player to pack his bags for London. This incident threatened to end Best's career at Easter Road there and then. But he eventually returned a week later, after reportedly admitting to alcoholism and pledging to take tablets that would make him ill if he drank spirits. Turnbull would later describe watching George as like being witness to a car accident taking place in slow motion. He considered Best overweight, unfit, and frankly not ready to play professional football at a high level. Best, for his part, later admitted, "To be honest, I couldn't take it. Playing for Hibs. Seriously, and the alcoholism had kicked in to the point where, if I were in a bar and enjoying myself, I wouldn't leave for anyone or anything." Despite occasional brilliance, Best's presence couldn't prevent Hibs from being relegated from the Premier Division that season. The low point of his time was perhaps the 5-0 drubbing in the Scottish Cup semi-final against Celtic. Played in front of 33 4-5 fans at Hampden Park, George would eventually be released by the club to it his persistent indiscipline in October 1980. After just 22 appearances and 3 goals, Tom Hart famously announced the marriage between George Best and Hibernian is over, emphasizing the point by sweeping his hand across a table of glasses to send them crashing to the ground. Best had spent a mere 5 days in Edinburgh, but not before leaving a trail of exasperated managers and awestruck fans, forever debating what might have been if the fire off the pitch hadn't burned so brightly. Following his departure from Hibernian, the siren call of America's burgeoning soccer scene proved irresistible once more. His last major stop in the NASL was with the San Jose Earthquakes, where he spent 2 seasons from 1980 to 1981. Best was still a significant draw, a guaranteed spectacle in the American sporting landscape, accumulating 56 appearances and scoring 21 goals for the club during his tenure. He notably played in front of massive crowds, including a NASL record 76,000 for a game against the star-studded New York Cosmos at Giants Stadium.
The Cosmos, they weren't just a football team. They were a galaxy of fading yet still brilliant stars,
Think of them as the Harlem Globetrotters of soccer, with legends like Pelé, yes, that Pelé, and Franz Beckenbauer. The Kaiser himself gracing the pitches of America. Playing against the Cosmos in their prime was like stepping onto a Hollywood set. You were sharing the stage with giants, even if some of them were a little past their action hero days. For George, it was a chance to measure himself one last time against the kind of names who used to dazzle in Europe, albeit in a slightly more relaxed, sun-drenched environment. The matches against the Cosmos were the real showpiece events in the NASL calendar, drawing crowds that dwarfed anything he'd seen since his Old Trafford heyday, and certainly far bigger than anything the lower leagues in England could muster. It was a carnival atmosphere, part sporting contest, part rock concert. And George, of course, thrived in the limelight, even if the defending was, shall we say, more enthusiast than effective. He might not have been turning defenders inside out quite as effortlessly as he once did, but his name on the team sheet against the Cosmos guaranteed spectacle, and that, in the NASL, was priceless. Despite his fading physical prowess, Best remained a potent force, defying critics with his enduring ability in his first full season for the Earthquakes in 1980. He was a key figure, contributing 8 goals and 11 assists in 26 games. The crowds at San Jose's home ground, Spartan Stadium, reveled in his moments of magic. His ability to hold onto the ball, draw defenders, and deliver a killer pass was still evident, even if the lung-bursting runs were fewer and further between. Perhaps the highlight of his time in San Jose, and one he himself later called one of the best goals of his career, occurred on July 22, 1981, against the Fort Lauderdale Strikers. It was dubbed the greatest NASL goal ever. Best received the ball, dribbled past 5 Strikers players, nimbly slicing and dicing his way to the 6-yard box, before blasting a left-footed shot into the back of the net. The television announcer, utterly stunned, famously yelled, "That is the greatest soccer goal I've ever seen." This utterly sublime individual effort was voted the 1981 NASL of the year. Coach John Coyle, while acknowledging Best's unconventional approach to training, often spoke of his undeniable talent, stating that George could have played until he was 50 if he'd looked after himself. And NASL was, for a time, his personal playground, a place where his brilliance was adored, and his excesses perhaps a little more tolerated than in the rigid structures of European football. He still offered moments of pure, unadulterated, Best magic flashes that reminded the American crowds exactly why he was a global legend. His presence alone elevated the profile of the Earthquakes in the league, proving that the name George Best still commanded attention, even if the legs were a step slower than they once were.
After his Californian adventure, he made yet another return to England. A fleeting one this time to the lower leagues with AFC Bournemouth in 1982 to 1983. Imagine the buzz in Dorset. The headline screamed, "Bestie comes to Dean Court." He was now in his mid-30s, still pulling in crowds desperate for a glimpse of the legend, still attempting those impossibly audacious dribbles. He was initially managed by Don Megson, and Harry Redknapp took the reins, a man who, even then, was a master of the colourful quote and the calculated gamble. Redknapp reportedly tried everything to manage Spess's unconventional routine, often attempting to keep him under wraps, perhaps even out of harm's way before a big match. George, however, was as elusive as ever. Harry would later recall the sheer frustration and simultaneous admiration of managing Best. He still had the touch, the most incredible touch. Redknapp would say, but the legs were gone. He'd do something amazing, then need 5 minutes to get his breath back.
He was still box office, even if his actual output was more fleeting cameo than full 90-minute masterclass. Indeed, George Best played just 5 matches for AFC Bournemouth during his brief return to the English lower leagues. His highly anticipated debut came against Newport County, drawing a crowd of over 9,000 to Dean Court, more than double the usual attendance. Though Bournemouth ultimately lost 1-0 during his blink, and you'd miss it 42-day stint, Best featured in only one away match, as 0-0 draw with Southend fans at Dean Court were often left to guess whether the iconic Northern Irishman would even line up on match day. Such was his unpredictability. His time there, marked by his usual blend of magic and mischief, famously ended when he missed a game against Doncaster Rovers, citing a chill as his reason. His final appearance for the club came against Wigan Athletic, and as a true footballing globetrotter, demonstrating that his appetite for new experiences and the lure of a kickabout were undimmed. He even ventured as far as Australia for a few games with the Brisbane Lions in 1983. This was less about a serious footballing career and more about a star appearance. A brief, sun-drenched cameo for the local fans. He'd turn up, still possess the incredible touch, charm the crowds, and then disappear back into the vibrant, carefree Australian lifestyle. It was another short chapter in a story now defined by its transient nature, a quest for a stage, any stage where the magic could still be found, if only for a moment. His very, very last recorded appearance, a poignant final act that brought his wandering career full circle, was a single game for Tobermoor United in Northern Ireland in 1984. He kept drinking, and he kept charming. His battle with alcoholism, which had begun as a quiet companion to his fame, became increasingly public, a harrowing, often desperate, backdrop to his enduring charisma. The very phrase that once encapsulated his rebellious freedom, booze, birds, and fast cars, hardened into a painful reality, a relentless cycle of addiction that he wrestled with very visibly in the public eye. Each new club, each new country, offered a fresh start, a new stage, but the personal demons, unfortunately, always seemed to pack their bags and follow.
He gave the world some of its most memorable, witty and brutally honest lines, often delivered with that famous twinkle in his eye, even when the underlying truth was stark and heartbreaking. I spent a lot of money on booze, birds, and fast cars, the rest I just squandered. A classic Best line delivered with a shrug, encapsulating a life of excess and regret, yet still somehow endearing. It was a confession, a punchline, and a lament all rolled into one. Another, perhaps even more revealing in its dark humor. I once said I'd given up women and drink. It was the worst 20 minutes of my life. These weren't just jokes, they were windows into the soul of a man perpetually at war with himself, whose genius on the pitch was matched only by his demons off it. He was a cautionary tale and a living legend all at once. His health inevitably deteriorated, liver failure. The final years were difficult, marked by public appeals and a valiant, but ultimately losing, battle against his addiction. He became a spokesperson against the very disease that consumed him, a final, poignant attempt to use his fame for a greater good. He passed away in 2005. At the age of 59, the news was met with national mourning, flags were lowered, tributes poured in from across the world from former teammates, managers, and millions of fans. His funeral was a massive event, a testament to the profound impact he had on so many lives. But amidst the profound sadness, there was also a celebration of a talent so pure, so unadulterated, that it transcended the controversies and the personal struggles. Because he had given us something that never left, not just the trophies, not just the goals, but the feeling, the sheer joy he brought to the game.
The audacity, the belief that football could be art, could be poetry in motion, could be played with a smile and a shrug. He left us with the memories of those dazzling runs, those impossible goals, those moments when he made the beautiful game truly beautiful. The genius, the swagger, the self-destruction, the charm, it all coalesced into a myth that continues to fascinate, a story that still pulls us in, even when we know the ending. He was and remains a footballing legend, unlike any other. So here's to George, to the nights under the dazzling floodlights of Old Trafford, where he danced through a galaxy of defenders, painting masterpieces on the canvas of the pitch. And here's to the afternoons with no lights at all at humble Creasy Park, where he still, for a fleeting moment, shone brighter than any star. He was the genius who, perhaps out of boredom, perhaps out of mischief, perhaps out of a profound, unspoken longing for simpler times, took a detour through the pub league. And in doing so, he reminded us that magic isn't confined to the biggest stages, that inspiration can be found in the most unexpected places. He gave a crowd, any crowd, whether it was 70,000 at Wembley or 500 at Dunstable, something to believe in. He made them feel that they were witnessing something truly special, something that defied the ordinary. And that perhaps is his true legacy. Not just the goals, but the feeling. Not just the victories, but the sheer, unadulterated joy he brought to the game. Sleep well, dear listener. Dream of nutmegs and net-rippling curlers. Dream of a Belfast boy with a ball and a brain that saw things differently. And remember, as you drift off into the quiet hum of the night, you never truly know who'll show up next at your local pub ground. Because in the beautiful, unpredictable world of football, especially in the lower leagues, genius can take the most surprising detours. Good night from Lowerleagues, and thank you for joining us on this very slow, very long, very meandering journey through the glorious, complicated life of George Best. We'll be back with another tale to help you drift off, but until then, keep an eye on those local pitches. You never know who you might see.